Hello and welcome to another Tippling Philosopher video, but it's not just my video because this is myself with in collaboration with Professor Darin Gerdes, and this is a kind of 50-50 experience. So we are going to be sort of co-hosting, basically having a chat together,
Mhm.
going through how we have arrived at this place, uh, given that we have completely separate worldviews, how we have ended up with two channels that are devoted almost entirely at the moment to the war in Ukraine. And that's a pretty interesting position to be in, considering we are arguably diametrically opposed politically and existentially. So,
Yeah,
uh, Darren, did you? Sorry, with that, I mean, say
yeah,
what
I was
you're.
about to say in many ways we are very much opposite. I'm probably the guy that you're writing about in your books, right? I mean,
Almost
so
certainly.
so we are on very different pages, but on this we can be unified. And I think we make a mistake in society of trying to divide everybody into every like you're different from me and you're different from and right. No, let's find that ground of unity because on this, on Ukraine, this is very important. So I don't care if you're double-headed unicorn. If you care about Ukraine, come to these channels, come learn about it, help us spread this message because this is important.
Absolutely, couldn't agree more. Would you like to introduce yourself to my viewership, and I will do that to yours, and let us know who you are, what you're about.
Yeah. So we were just talking beforehand about how, it's interesting that many of these people that are on YouTube doing these video updates about things, like Jonathan and myself, we were doing something else first. I had a podcast called the Leader Smith Podcast. I'm a professor of management who teaches and studies leadership. So I view everything through the lens of leadership. That is, what I do. That's my bread and butter. It's what I spend all my time with. So when I heard Zelenskyy say, I need ammunition, not a rod, I went, what? Who is this guy? I need to know more. Like he's the guy that was on the other side of the Trump impeachment, right? Like and I found out everything I could in a matter of just a few days. I had sketched out a decent book about him. 3 weeks into the war, I had a ebook up on Kindle, and then I updated it every day for the first 4 or 5 months of the war. At a certain point, I was seeing that the news had dropped off. And I was going like, what happened? Well, Johnny Depp's trial was more important than news on Ukraine. No, that can't be right. That can't be right. So at that point, I'm looking at it going, okay, how do I spread this message further? So I just jumped back on YouTube from what I was doing before. I know how to do the YouTube videos. And so I just started doing my updates there to spread the message as far as I could, as wide as I could. And along the way, I just every day have been doing this since day 85, and it's now day 315, as you know. And that's where I am. And people who are really interested in, listen, I'm a professor, so I sound like a professor, and I unpack things systematically like a professor would. So I'm never going to be a Kardashian. Right. I'm just, this is who I am. And if people want to hear, like, so what I do is I go through the news rigorously. I go through legit journalistic integrity kind of articles, AP, Reuters, major newspapers, that kind of thing. So I'm not going to be the fastest to give you the information, but I'll give you the most accurate information that we have. And then I'll try to give you some history behind it or some insight into it and try to make some sense of what's going on. So that's what I do over on my channel. And you can find me by just typing my name, Darin Gerdes, Gerdes, into YouTube, and you'll find me. And there I am with the Ukrainian flag behind me. That's the channel.
So, but aside from that, you are also, as is pertinent to this discussion, you are a Republican,
Yep.
a conservative Republican, I,
Yep.
I take it, but also a Christian as
Yep.
well.
I
So,
also homeschool my kid. I'm a walking stereotype.
right,
Yeah, I
interesting.
have six kids and we homeschool. And so yeah,
Do you, do
I'm a
you know
walking
what I
stereotype.
have? I have written pieces against you.
I figure so much. That's okay.
Yeah, yeah. So we are fairly diametrically opposed. So
That's right.
give in these ways. So give us a little taste of who you are, maybe politically, religiously, to then, and I'll give my side of the coin.
Yeah, evangelical Christian, went to Christian universities for both my undergraduate and graduate work. And I mean, I was born one Sunday, in church the next. Father was an elder in the church. I mean, like I said, I homeschool my 6 kids. So yeah, but that's that side of it. As far as conservative as opposed to liberal, there's divisions within conservatism. There's people just think conservatives are some monolithic group. No group is actually monolithic. And so within conservatives, there's like a split between like a Trumpian populist kind of conservative, and those are, I wouldn't even use the word conservative necessarily, populist. And those are the ones that are really most antagonistic toward Ukraine. And then there's the Reagan kind of conservatives, or I'm trying to remember, faith and flag and faith conservative is what Pew Research calls them. And yeah, that's where I find myself. And if you ask yourself, what would Reagan do? The answer is pretty clear right away. Like, how would Reagan deal with this issue with Ukraine and Russia?
Yeah.
Easy.
So you've got the old school kind of hawkish conservatives who might be sort of, involved in previous wars, or that you would expect to be fairly hawkish on international political scenes like this. And then the kind of, as you say, the MAGA Trumpian conservatism has come along, and there seems to be this fissure in the GOP, in the Republican Party over there.
Yeah.
And it is interesting that right now today, so Kevin McCarthy, who's interesting because he has previously said he's not going to give a blank check to Ukraine, right?
Mhm.
He's going to become Speaker possibly of the House.
Mhm.
Now he's having trouble because actually that
Mm-hmm.
sort of MAGA right conservative section wants him to be even more fervently rightist, and they are basically being an obstacle to him becoming the speaker again. So he's going to have to play to them. Do you think that that will play into the hands of Putin going
Oh,
forward?
I don't know that it's quite right. I don't think it's the MAGA right that's stopping him. There's about 20 of them they want checks and balances to keep him from having too much power that Pelosi took to herself, that they want to give back to the speaker, or that they want to give back to the House that the speaker consolidated before. I think that he's going to have to play nice with both sides, and that'll tamp down the MAGA isolationist type, right?
Yeah, because even the MAGA group, I can tell this from some people on my channel, is that some MAGA Republicans are pro-war and some
That's right.
MAGA Republicans are anti-war. It's a
Yeah.
broad church.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And so I think it's not going to be as, like, people are like, "Oh, if the Republicans take over, it's all going to be, I'm like, no, no, no. And but you don't understand. The Republicans are like this. I'm like, I do understand. I'm the poster child, right? So it's not like what you see. And in fact, when we started talking about this initially, I reached out and we were talking about this now, and we aimed for this day because we figured that yesterday the new speaker would be in, and so it would be topical. The new speaker is not done yet. 6 rounds of going through this. So
incredible.
Yeah, so that's what's going on there. But that's just the US, right? I mean, there's a broader world, and we have to see what's going on in the broader environment. Okay, tell my viewers about you, because not everybody's going to know you. So tell us your background.
So I'm a philosopher. I'm an author. I've written probably a dozen books on whether or not God exists, whether free will exists. All these kind of ideas. I'm an atheist. I'm also a public speaker and a journalist. I'm a journalist for Only Sky, which is a secular, a non-religious media organization that's just it's new to the scene. So it's less than a year old. So it's just about a year old now. So I write for them, and I've got primary progressive multiple sclerosis. So generally, I work from home these days, and I'm not. If I lose the train of thought tonight, or if I struggle to get words, which sometimes I do, I end up having to cut so many ums and ahs and repetitions out of some of my videos because I get a bit of brain fog. But there you go. That's who I am, and I always wonder. So I wrote a piece. Actually, I produced a podcast for Only Sky, talking about. I'm just going to show you this because it's kind of prevalent to what we're talking about. It's called The Apple in the River, right? And this was me giving my account. It's an audio podcast of why I am like I am, predominantly politically, and why that's quite different to my parents. Because I believe that the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. But I was in a situation where my dad was in the Navy, so quite traditional, nationalistic. You'd think I could end up like that, but I'm not. But then I went to boarding school, so we lived all around the world, and so actually the apple fell into a river and kind of went to the other side of the world, if you like.
Mhm.
And my nurturing and I lived half my life away from my parents in that respect, and so therefore I was able to develop in the way that my genes and who biologically I was, with a very different environment. And I want to speak to you about this, actually. So one of the things I knew from very early on is that I was really, and this is very pertinent to the Ukraine question, I was really, really interested in fairness. And when we look at political psychology and the work of people like Jonathan Haidt, like liberals are seen more in terms of valuing a lack of harm, and fairness and openness to new experiences.
Sure.
All of those things are really big for me, whereas conservatives are generally seen as being much more interested in tradition, purity, possibly authority, but that can work both ways. And these other ideas, they're in group. But I knew very early that I had those kind of liberal tendencies. So my question to you would be, given that we're seeing that in America, there's this thing called church shopping, where people actually will move churches to adapt the church to their political psychology, to their political morality, which means that your politics and your morality comes first, and then your religion and faith comes next. So my question to you, so this is like some interesting data about this. My question to you would be, do you think your faith adapts to your already like developed sense of morality and political psychology, or do you think your politics and morality adapts to your faith?
I think they both impact each other. Let's go back to Haidt. Haidt talks about how liberals adapt to one or two or three channels, right? So liberals are on these, and then conservatives have multiple channels beyond that they find interesting. Like, so for example, authority is something that we prize. So when kneeling instead of honoring the flag, it riles up a conservative. It doesn't rile up a liberal. They're like mute to these channels. Right. Yeah. So that's just the difference between them. So, and so I wanted to clarify that that's just the way that we operate differently. I think one impacts the other, but I think so. For example, you talk about church shopping. I wouldn't call it that, although I do call denominations franchises, because it's actually a really good term for it. Right. I mean, it actually kind of seems to work out like that. I do think that conservatives, tend to gravitate to conservative churches and liberals to liberal churches. And there's evidence of that. But I think to the degree that you're trying to conform yourself to what is right, you might now see a different church as having done it more right. There's competition, right? Like the Church of England's like the big game in town where you are. There's lots of competition around the United States, and there always has been. And I think that's been healthy for the growth of those different churches. But that's a side note. Let's get back to Ukraine and see,
well, why I asked that question is because, like, if it's a sense of political psychology that's at work here, like almost your core value or part of your core identity, then we could have similar kind of core identities, and the faith thing adapts to that. So it's what I'm trying to work out is it part of your faith worldview that's got you absolutely interested?
Yes, it has. Yeah. And let me give you an example. So I, in my doctoral dissertation, I studied the American founding fathers. I did the Nazis for my thesis, and that was a toll, right? I was reading a book in the library. I worked in the library in graduate school. That's nerdy. And I'm sitting there reading about these Nazi atrocities, like injecting dye into the eyes of Jews in order to see if you can change the color. I mean, just brutal stuff. And I'm sitting there and I'm playing with a rubber band, and without thinking about it, I reach it around and with the rubber band, right? Like I reach it around and I'm like, oh, I got to take a break. So when I got to my doctoral dissertation, I'm not making that mistake twice. So I spent my time with the American founding fathers. They had a very clear, much more clear understanding of theology than what we do today, generally speak. I mean, as far as the population goes. And one of these is like, there are bad people out there, right? Now you can call it a Calvinistic something or another, but bad people exist. There are bad people doing bad things to innocent Ukrainians today. Bad people exist. So that's how like I filter and come to this, like there is right and there is wrong. And I can see that very clearly. To my mind, I feel like I would come to it more naturally than you would, given that you've got to have to more, I can deduce this much more readily, I think, where you have to inductively come to it.
Well, I think my argument is that actually we're both probably operating psychologically, and I think quite often humans do that, and then we post hoc rationalize, which is to say we then put the rationality on top of that after we've come to a conclusion. We do this all the time. We can do this with going to a painting, and you go and see a painting, you say, "Oh, I really like that painting," and then someone asks you why you like it, and then you add a bunch of reasons on, but you just kind of add post hoc rationalizing why you like it. And I think we do that maybe with moral evaluations as well. In fact, there's evidence to suggest that that's precisely what we do. And I wonder, whether you can then you kind of say, right, this is bad or these people are good, and then you can add on the faith rationality or rationale to that afterwards. But what I'm trying to say is I think that political psychology is our core kind of like driver of a lot of our behavior.
I think it coexists. I don't know that I would say that necessarily, but it's certainly a coexist, and it has an impact on how we see things. If you look at the number of the 10 commandments that are being broken by Russian soldiers in Ukraine, it's pretty large. So I mean, I have no issue, and it strikes me because people that don't understand the way that conservatives or Christians think, they're going to start thinking like, well, how can you be so militant? Well, because you got to stop that. This is what justice demands, is that you stop stuff like this when you see it. This is why I weigh in on Ukraine. I'm all in on Ukraine. All right, this is wrong. Let's call out wrong when we see the wrong.
This is very much like just war,
Yeah, sure.
Augustine and Thomas Aquinas, and the just war theory. I mean, it's got problems with the theorizing behind just war, but the idea is that you can have war if it's just, and in fact, this would be a really good example of just war, which is in including everyone else looking at this, saying we've got an over aggressive. I mean, you can simplify it and say, look, someone's walking down the road, someone else bigger and tougher walks up to them, punches them in the face or mugs them or whatever. Then do we get involved to stop that happening? Yes, we do. That's just war. So we are getting involved to stop that happening, and hopefully we do that in as humane a way and decent a way as possible. But it is war, and that's a terrible scenario. But
so that's the human condition, and I have no problem saying, look, this is terrible, this is sin. I mean, the world is marred by this, and so I see that there are bad things. We have to address the world, the fallen world, as it is. That's just where we are. And
yeah, I mean, it's interesting. So you would see that as part of the fallen world, and you doing your job to ameliorate that. Whereas I see it's the fact that, excuse my French, but shit happens, and the world is unfair. And in fact, these are kind of some of the reasons I would give for God not existing. Whereas you would come at it from a completely different point of view. And
we come from exactly opposite places, but however we do the math, we get to the same place, that this needs to stop.
Yeah.
And so we have, and what's terrible is that we have to recognize that we have to find points of unity where we can find points of unity instead of divide each other. Emo Phillips, are you familiar with the comedian Emo Phillips?
His best joke was purportedly the best joke ever
told, or
whatever.
Is it the bridge?
Yeah, the one where like, are you a Southern Baptist?
Let me tell it.
Yeah.
So okay. Emo Phillips, he sees a guy on a bridge and he's about to jump. He says, no, don't jump. And he says, well, why? Why shouldn't I jump? I mean, nobody cares about me. And it's like, no, God cares about you. Oh, and he has this conversation of him. Oh, are you? And he says, Emo says to the guy about to jump, are you a Christian or a Jew? He says, I'm a Christian. So am I. I. And he says, well, are you Protestant or Catholic? He says, I'm Protestant. So am I. And he says, oh, what franchise? That's actually where I got the term from, with franchise.
Yeah.
He says, Baptist. I said, so am I. And he said, Northern Baptist or Southern Baptist? He said, Northern Baptist. So am I. He says, Northern Baptist Council of 1812 or Northern Baptist Council of 1917? He said, Northern Baptist Council of 1917. He said, die, heretic. And he pushed him over the bridge. And we got to stop doing that. You and I have very little in common in our philosophical outlooks, but we have something tremendously in common right here. Let's work together, build bridges where we can build bridges. That's how we should be operating in a just and polite society.
I wonder, because I think you've got the same issue as I have, but from the other side, right?
Sure.
Which is that I've got now a geopolitical channel that's dealing with the Ukraine war, and it turns out that half of my viewers are quite right wing, and I'm pretty left wing, and so therefore I have to think about how I say things. I don't want to go on rants about Trump, because then I'll be like, there'll be just like attacks on my and I think about how I couch things. And for you, I presume you've got some left wingers on your channel.
I did a poll, and they're majority left wing, which the irony there is not lost on me. But look, I don't spend time talking about other political issues, right? I talk about Ukraine, and I spend time like, hey, if you're about Ukraine, if you want to support them, you're in the right place. And then when people want to get Trump this or Trump that, I don't know why people want to think, or people on the left always think that everything's about Trump. That's what Trump. If you want Trump to feel like he's winning, keep talking about him. Like,
it's because that's true. But the last 4 years has felt like that.
But that's not conservatism. And I actually find a lot in common with classic liberals, because classic liberals, they don't want to shut me down. The classic liberal, they want to have the argument and beat me. And I want to have the argument and beat them. So that's fine. Let's do that. And that's the way we ought to be thinking about getting along.
Do you find, because I've watched a number of your videos, and I'm often quite surprised when you'll use the Guardian as one of your sources. You say, this is a piece from Guardian, I really like this writer, blah blah blah. And then whereas I wonder whether 6 months ago you would have done that, or do you know what I mean? Or like, do you find that you are coming across new sources that you wouldn't have previously have interacted with?
Yeah, the freakiest thing is I agree with CNN on a lot of things. I mean, that's that has been mind blowing. And
welcome to the middle of the bell curve.
Yeah, I mean, about Ukraine, CNN actually does a pretty good job about things. On other domestic politics kind of thing, I'm like, oh gosh, really? I'm not a racist, okay? I'm not. It's like again and again, like but on Ukraine, they actually do a good job. So the Guardian, it's not so much which side of the spectrum. I'm looking for journalistic integrity, and they're dealing with facts on the ground in Ukraine, and it's a different thing. So I'll go to Reuters or AP or the Guardian, or New York Times actually did a really good job with the Ukraine coverage or whatever. So I'm trying to draw from a very large sample that's not just the United States and has journalistic integrity. That's what I'm really trying to do.
So I was just going to say, I wonder whether that kind of behavior, if you do that enough, whether that would make you more open. Do you know what I mean? Make you kind of more pluralistic, because as you were talking about before, we all live in our echo chambers, and we all otherize other people, and we're all like, we have our little in groups, and you would have been like that in the same way that I'm not saying, we're all kind of like that. And I wonder whether being forced to, like myself, being forced to talk to a lot of people who are diametrically opposed to myself on my own channel threads, forces me to become more accepting, maybe more pluralistic in a sense.
So I think, all your questions, it's both and. I think, yes, it probably does that. But on the other side, you already had to be open to it in order to allow it. Like, I made an intentional decision that I wasn't going to just look at right wing. Here's what Fox News had to say. And by the way, I can't stand Tucker Carlson going on and on about this stuff. Like, I showed on my channel that Tucker Carlson was repeated on RT 300 some odd times. That is not a good sign. Right. And I do a segment on mine that is fun with Russian state media, where I look at RT and Pravda and other things along those lines to see what they had to say after we see what was in verifiable news sources. Right. And it's like looking through a funhouse mirror. I mean, it's really bizarre what they're willing to say. And we know you're lying. like Solzhenitsyn had this great line about, we know they're lying, they know we're lying, or they're lying, we know, they know that we know that they're lying, and yet they still lie, right?
Yes, the whole thing about Varanyo, which is this, understand Perun did a great video on this, which is this,
That's right. There's a culture
in Russia of that. Is like you hand a report to your commander, you say, like, I know this is BS, you know it's BS, you know that I know that you know it's BS, but I'm doing it anyway, you're gonna rubber stamp it, job done, and we all live in this kind of like network of BS.
Yeah, there was the 5-year plans in the Soviet bloc. When I was in Lithuania, I heard this statement and I thought, man, that is brilliant. They had their 5-year plans, right? A 5-year plan is completed in 4 years with 3 teams of 2 people on 1 paycheck. Yeah, I mean, they know it's not going to happen. They know it's not actually, right? But that's
but everyone goes along with it. Yeah. So so there you go. I mean, what do you think about people like Tucker Carlson who like, what is motivation? I know it's like armchair psychoanalyzing someone, but what do you think his motivations are? And for anyone like him who is justifying, who seems to be a mouthpiece for Putin to some degree, who in the West, and there are multiple other players that we could probably name, but to use him as an example.
All right, let me broaden the scope. Before we started, we were just chatting and we were talking about, like, how can you not see that Ukraine is the victim and Russia is the aggressor here? How do you not see that? And my response was, if you buy Russian propaganda, if you believe what Putin is putting out, then it makes sense. Oh, NATO is threatening you. Well, NATO has been getting closer, but actually, it's not that NATO is getting closer. It's that those former Soviet bloc countries are running away. They're trying to get away from somebody, from this country that has dominated them, right? So if you buy the things that Putin repeats again and again and again about how, the West made us do this and we didn't want this war, and right, then okay, then it makes sense for you to buy that framework and start thinking, well, if you didn't keep pushing toward them, I mean, or it's you didn't fulfill Minsk too. Well, you didn't fulfill the Budapest Memorandum either. Like, you got to understand what's going on. Hey, Cheryl, she's on both of our
us. Yeah. I was just going to say she's one that goes across both. I wonder whether, and this goes back to political psychology again. I quite like the moral compass, which is rather than left right. The moral compass talks about like economic left right, and then authoritarianism down to libertarianism, individual libertarianism. So and I think someone like Tucker Carlson may also have a real penchant for authoritarian leaders, and I don't want to be overtly anti-Trump here, but the reason why Trump himself, it really likes authoritarian leaders. So that's why he liked Kim Jong-un. That's why he liked Putin. That's why he liked Bolsonaro. That's, Orban, all these people he gravitated towards. And then for someone like Tucker Carlson, who again liked Trump, who is pretty authoritarian in my opinion, and then likes Orban, then likes Putin. It's because these are your strongmen leaders. Do you think that has anything to do with it?
So I'm not.
I mean, you are a leadership guy.
Yeah. I'm not going to get into bashing Trump.
I don't
think that serves any purpose here, and I don't particularly want to bash him. I just want him to stop interjecting and then giving the other side a club to beat him with, and it's like. Anyway, but let's move from Tucker to the broader picture here. I hear a lot from people on the left, particularly, that if Trump was still in power, he would have just given Russia over. Is that, given Ukraine over to Russia? Is that how you see that, or do you see that differently?
This is really interesting you mention that, because an awful lot of people on the right, pro-Trump, saying that if Trump had been in charge, this never would have happened. And
that's exactly the way that I would see it. No, that's exactly the way that I would have seen it. Now, it's not so much. You tell me your reason why, and I'll tell you.
Well, I just think he would have capitulated. I think he would have been. Like Helsinki was a really key moment when he stood up next to Putin and said, basically, I believe Putin. I don't believe my own intelligence services. That was, to me, like probably one of the most important missteps Trump ever made. That and not helping the Kurds. I
absolutely. The Kurds have been our best friends. I mean, those guys rock. Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, and I just think, and so I think that when when you understand that Putin wanted Trump in charge, and that's why they were meddling in the elections, that I think that, and I know you can disagree, but I think you've got to understand who do they want in charge, who do they think they could affect more, and then that gives you an understanding. I fully think it would have happened under Trump without a doubt.
Yeah, and so I am stereotypically on the other side of that. I don't think Trump's ego would have let him. This is where you have to concede to me that he has an ego that's a mile high, and I don't think he would have allowed this to happen. Remember, 2014 happened on Obama's watch with Biden as his vice president, right? Just factor that in, and then think about how Trump would have looked if he had allowed something to go wrong on his watch. That's the way that conservatives tend to filter and think through that kind of thing. I think he likes to be more cozy, but
you could be right, actually. I mean, I guess I was actually looking at it a step back. So some people say to me that Putin never would have gone to war had Trump been in charge, and I don't.
And they do say that. And so think about what happened domestically before Putin went to war. The U.S. aggressively pushed a look of weakness with the way that they bailed out of Afghanistan. That was terrible, right? And I think that kind of pushed him along. Now, Biden, I don't know
that he was acting on what had gone before, though.
I understand. Yeah. So, but the way, I mean, the images of people falling off the plane and that kind, I mean, it was bad, right? So then you have Biden, who I think was trying to right the ship when you got to around January-ish, and he was trying to say, no, Putin, you don't do this. This is going to be bad. But it was, I think, too little, too late at that point. Putin had already kind of made up his mind. So I think I was just replying in a comment to somebody today about this, that so what about with Xi? Putin's hard talk to Xi about don't do this, we will defend Taiwan, is not to saber rattle. It is to keep China from making the same mistake. Right. And you have to send a clear message. Bush 1 got it wrong. I mean, Bush 1 gave Saddam Hussein a signal that, hey, we don't care about Kuwait. It turned out it wasn't right, but he allowed it because he allowed it to think it'll pass, and you can't make it. Look, there are bad people out there in the world. You have to deal with bad people who think through a different framework of, like, they don't recognize I recognize your humanity, your dignity, your worth before God, right? You might not. I do. I'll do it for you. Okay.
I recognize it before humanity, but yes.
But there are people that think diametrically differently about the value of life. I mean, just about the value of life itself. Now, I prize human life, even orcs. I know that sounds terrible, but even them, I want to refine them, reform them, and make them not do these bad things. And if they won't do that, I want to stop them by any means necessary. So, but you can see the Russian military doesn't care about them at all. They send them into the wood chipper. I mean, they're fine with doing that. Some people just have a different mentality that it's just hard to understand.
And I think that there's a lot to be said about sort of cultural mentality in Russia, and the value of human life and humans seeing as part of, I don't know, like human resource personnel, just like things that you put into an equation. You look at the history of Marxism, or sorry, the history of communism, really, and 5-year plans and famines and Holodomor and all this. It's like the value of human life is just nothing compared to the greater ideology and work towards that, and so on and so forth. So absolutely, I would say, just going back to the original, well, what we were talking about before, and talking about sort of Biden and America, just America in general. It's like sometimes I have to say to some of my viewers that we need to be careful when we say Trump did this or Biden did this. Actually, more often than not, they're just the figurehead that's acting on the information they're given. So when it comes to things like war and these very in-depth decisions, actually they are victim to whatever information they're given, and they will also be strongly persuaded by actors in these environments.
Yeah, and that's very fair, and it also applies to Putin, who was given lies from below him, who thought that they were going to be they were going to be met with flowers in the streets. And as Anna from Ukraine said, that they were going to be met with flowers at their graves. What a great line.
Yeah.
And yeah, but they thought that they were going to roll right over. The U.S. intelligence thought it was going to be pretty quick, which is why they were offering a ride to Zelenskyy. And, so I think that's a very fair statement.
But having said that, I think Biden and or the administration in America, US, has done a really good job in attempting to unify a very difficult geopolitical landscape, given the EU and all the member countries of the EU, and many of them with different ideas. And I think he's had a really difficult job in trying to guide the rest of the world without looking to Russia like it's all about America guiding people. So then it becomes a war against America. So it's like trying to bring along people with you and give them enough decision-making capability and enfranchise them in order to make their own decisions, but actually say, but you really need to make this decision type thing. And I think, America have actually done a pretty decent job. I don't know.
Yeah, I would agree that Biden has done a good job not screwing this up and actually following Zelensky's lead. And I say that, like, I hate to say that because I want, I'm an American. I'm a proud American. I want America to lead. Zelenskyy, when he came to the Capitol and this speech, like, Zelensky's brilliant. I mean, his media savvy, they called Reagan the great communicator. That's what Zelenskyy is for Ukraine. I mean, really, his media background served him well. When he went to Britain, what did he do? He talked about Churchill. And so we'll defeat them on the fields and in the hills and then he added and in the Dnieper and started listing places in Ukraine. It's like, wow, that was clever to put that together. I mean,
he's done that. I
got goosebumps, and I'm not British.
Yeah, he's done that with every country. So yeah,
that's right. And when he came to the U.S.,
psyche.
That's right. And when he came to the U.S., he said, "Look, remember 9/11? That terrible day? That's what's happening in my country every day." And then he showed this heart-wrenching video of a peaceful Ukraine, and then was being interpreted all along, right, while he's speaking to Congress, and a heart-wrenching video of Ukraine, and then just like peaceful, and then there's all this death and destruction, and a man weeping over his child, and all kinds of stuff like that. And then he speaks in English, and he says, "America, Joe Biden, I need you to be the leader of the world, the leader in peace," right? And like, as an American, like, you couldn't really say much more than what he said that would have hit a higher note, because he was speaking to it. He was calling it out. And Biden has stepped up to that challenge. I give him credit. Boris did an even better job. Now, Boris, I don't know what you think about him as far as politically, and let's not probably get into that. But he was the first one on the ground in Kyiv. And to his credit, he was the leader of this process in the early days. Right. As far as uniting.
It's interesting. So that's a really good point. And the cynic in me is like, did he realize very soon that because actually he was getting so many more plaudits in Ukraine. He was going
at home,
hero worship, and everyone at home is like, you're just a complete lying bastard. In fact, all of conservatives, many of the conservatives were like, this is unacceptable. He was he'd already been sacked before he came PM twice or three times for lying in different contexts. So he's a proven liar. And there was fractures all over the place. And so, but Ukraine, I think for him, was like this sanctuary where he's like, I can make it here. And
whatever his motivation, he did the right thing in leading and unifying Europe in a way that Biden couldn't, because he's not European.
Well, there's an interesting context there as well, because of course in Britain there's all of these dynamics to do with Brexit and coming out of the EU. And so if he was seen by Europe to be doing really well with Ukraine, then the rest of Europe are going to go, well, that's embarrassing. Like, I'm really pro EU, right? So I'm a Remainer, but like, I could see Europe going, we don't want to be shown up by Johnson, because that means that actually a country can come out of Europe and be the heroes. Like, we want a piece of that. And you're starting to see Germany step up to the plate a lot. I know there are issues there, but certainly in terms of equipment and money, you're starting to see France has been very quiet on this stuff they've given. But actually, it turns out they've given a fair amount. You've got Italy coming through, and obviously Poland, Estonia, Latvia, even more so in Czechoslovakia, so Czech Republic. So, I think Johnson, you're right. It doesn't matter why he got there, and he did the right thing. And all the rest of Europe must have seen that, or they joined the party.
Yeah, I think he did a great job in those early days, but Zelenskyy is masterful as a leader. I mean,
Mm.
he's sung all his high notes. He makes a little issue here or there. I didn't like his media law of converging that. I talked about it yesterday with the
Do you want
law
to
that was
explain that
going
to
to
the viewers?
have some. So, yeah, it was just a consolidating all the channels. I didn't have an issue with the Russian Orthodox, the Orthodox Church that was connected to Russia, because that there was actually clearly channels going back to Russia
Mm.
through that. So as much as I would otherwise defend, I'm the faith and freedom kind of conservative, right? As much as I would otherwise defend that, no, you can't use the church for that means and then think that that's not going to happen. I mean, right? So he's made a few little missteps, but he's made a few little missteps and he's hit so many high notes all the way through that he's just like, he stays in his lane. People would complain, like Tucker would complain about, hey, you look like a bouncer from some club showing up in a sweatshirt. No, he was wearing the right attire
Yeah,
for the time.
he did it.
Okay, if he showed up in a suit and tie, how off note would that be? How tone deaf would
Yeah.
that have been?
I did a whole
He,
section on that because that really annoyed me. It's like, this is
yeah.
his style. Like, this is exactly what you'd expect him to wear. He is iconic. Like, this is now iconic. It's so iconic that he just can't wear anything else.
Now, he's not trying to be the military, like, let me tell you how to, like, Putin was
No.
actually calling out strikes in the eastern side in Donbass and whatever. He wasn't trying to do that at all. He lets his military leaders do military leader stuff while he's busy, like, trying to make sure all the plates are spinning, right? The political plates, the economic plates, the how are we going to rebuild afterwards plate. And when he's talking about how are we going to rebuild afterwards, he's lifting people's eyes to the future. And that's really necessary to instill hope at a desperate time. And he's done all the things that he's supposed to do. He stays in his lane. So I'm really impressed with him. We were talking about his New Year's speech, for example, and comparing like his and Putin's. I did a video about that. Putin's thing was like the kinds of things that you would expect him to say. It was more dark and ominous because remember, he started off saying, this is just a special military operation. There's nothing really to see here. It's not even, and you can get in trouble if you call it a war, right? And now he's there. He's recognizing that this is going to be a big thing, and he was calling out people that ran out of the country in that speech. Like I think that they're going to have another round of mobilization, and they're going to close the borders. But
Yeah, I'd agree with you.
I believe that that's what's going to happen. Okay, but now, so he said some of the right things, like, "Well, our hearts are with you," and but it was like, "Our hearts are with you, and we will say a toast at our table," right? Like Zelenskyy wasn't saying that at all. He was like saying thank you to everyone who's done everything, anything. It doesn't matter if you were, pulling the trigger of the gun, or if you were a doctor in the hospital, or if you were, just helping the elderly person get away from a dangerous area, or right. Everybody's important. He kept dealing with
That
that.
speech structurally was brilliant. I mean,
Oh
he
my
used
gosh.
loads of rhetorical techniques that were fantastic, repetition for effect, repetition of grammatical structures, but it was all about unity. It was all about we. I
That's
mean, you
right.
talked about his use of the we, but it's not just that. It was like every area of Ukraine, every type of
He
Ukrainian
spoke to
people,
all of them.
the old woman, the young child, the grandparent, the parents,
Mm-hmm.
the worker, the person logging onto their laptop, the person fighting on the front line, the old woman throwing a jar of tomatoes, all the regions,
Yep.
everyone played their part. It was just a masterclass in unity, in evoking a sense of unity amongst the people he's talking to. Absolutely brilliant.
Now, nerd that I am, I went and calculated how many times Putin said I, we, or no, we,
Yeah,
our,
you did.
or us. And he said it 48 times. Zelenskyy said it 97 times and with better context. And it was just right there. That alone tells you the difference between the way that these leaders see things. With Putin, I get a sense it's all about I am the state, l'état c'est moi, right? Like Louis XIV. I mean, that's what I get the sense of with Putin. Zelenskyy naturally doesn't seem to think in those kind of categories. His knee-jerk reaction is to think us.
I don't know if this means anything. I don't know if it's just a soundbite, but perhaps I just thought about this. The future of Zelensky's in Ukraine, whereas Putin sees the future of Russia's in Putin. Like, it's different, Zelensky's success is the success of Ukraine. Russia's success is the success of Putin. I don't know.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think there may be something to that. I think Putin doesn't separate Russia from him.
Yeah. whereas Zelenskyy is all about everyone else, and if everyone does well, he does well.
There's just a different disposition. I had a professor and so who you are leaks out, right? I can't help being me in the way that I discuss things, and people will be like, don't talk about politics. Okay, I have to talk about politics to the degree that it fits in here, but I try not to go off the reservation, right? And same thing with you. I mean, right? But who you are,
I just find it more difficult, right?
who you are leaks out. It comes through.
Yeah.
I had a professor when I was in graduate school that said, look, if you're a racist, you're going to say racist remarks. That's just the way it is. You have to be the right kind of person first before you get to that place, because it's just it'll come out. What you are will come out. Christ said, by your fruit you'll know them. That's right. I mean, you'll see that. I mean, you'll see it in the proofs in the pudding.
Yeah. Proof of the pudding's in the tasting, and hopefully it tastes good.
By the way, what is figgy pudding? I gotta know.
So it's made out of we get like fig biscuits and stuff. Fig, obviously, you know what figs are, but you can turn them into like a paste and make like sweet dishes out of them, I guess.
Is it any good?
Figgy pudding's not something I don't think anyone in Britain would have now. I think it's more of an 1800s thing.
Okay, I have no idea, but I sing it every year, and then I go,
yeah.
One of these years. Okay.
Yeah, I will. So one thing I was going to talk to you, and just before I do that, thank you so much, Critical Faculty. Henny, who's down under, Australian. I'm going to be doing an interview with him on Monday. So check that. I think it's Monday or Tuesday.
Well, if you're still watching, I don't know what happened to him, but I'll talk in the meantime.
So basically, I can't feel my fingers as part of my MS thing. So sometimes when I'm using the mouse, I just press all sorts of stuff.
That's okay. I just figured I'd keep talking until you came back.
Yeah, I hopped out then, just Anyway, thanks, Henny. Thanks, Critical Faculty. What a legend, great guy. So one question I wanted to ask you was the Russian Orthodox Church, obviously, because you're a man of faith, right?
Yep.
How do you evaluate something like the Russian Orthodox Church and how that's been involved, not so much in Ukraine, that's been problematic as you've hinted, but actually politically in Russia, and how Putin has used it, and it's become involved in the culture wars that have gone on in Russia, which have been kind of, you see those kind of culture wars taking place in the US as well, but been really big time in Russia. And in fact, you've now seen legislation about LGBT and all sorts of stuff in Russia that has helped galvanize a kind of nationalistic, authoritarian like scenario, which also involves a church, and the church gives that a kind of theological validation, perhaps. How do you see it?
Okay, so I see a couple of things. One, you can't use the church to ship in your propaganda, your support, your messages, your whatever. You can't. There's got to be the barrier there first. Okay, but the thing about that was Bishop Kirill, who is supposed to, or not bishop. He's got a different title. It's escaping me. I'm not Orthodox.
Is the head
Patriarch Kirill, saying at one point, and I tracked this down, and I read the whole thing, that if you die, a greater love hath no man than he lay down his life for his friends. Okay, that's fair. That's scriptural. I get that. But then saying that your sins will be absolved, meaning you'll go to heaven if you die in combat for Russia. That's heresy, absolute heresy. There's no possible reason that he could say that and still be holding to the Bible itself. So I have no love lost for that guy. As far as the church itself, I don't know enough about the theological differences or intricacies between them to be able to intelligently speak. And I've just, as a course, I try not to talk about things that I don't know about. Like I stay out of the military lane of what this kind of missile is, because I'm not a missileer like Jake Bro.
It's so good to say sometimes, or it's fine to say sometimes, I don't know. We don't say it enough. Here's an interesting Octonite, thanks for this. Darin, Jonathan, I adore your enthusiasm and your daily support to Ukraine, and thank you for that. And I'm sure.
Thank you.
Yeah. I did this in a very early video, and we haven't quite talked about this. We sort of talked about why we're interested in Ukraine, kind of, but like, why am I obsessed with Ukraine and the war? And it's part. So I've talked about part of this is like, I am really, fairness gets me, and if something's really unfair, it gets my goat. And if something's unfair on a massive scale, then I'm like, right, this does me in. But then there's the interest side, which is geopolitics. I'm obsessed with politics, and I'm obsessed with geopolitics. But also, there's an element in me as a kid. Maybe I played the old sort of war games and computer games involving strategy and war, and all these kind of things that are quite geeky, and made models of tanks and things like that, and got War Machine magazine. I was just a typical kid that was kind of interested in that kind of stuff, whereas now as an adult, less so. But this has maybe triggered this interest in war and strategies and maps, which is dangerous in a sense, because sometimes you forget this is a human conflict with human lives that are at the bottom of it. But that's another aspect of why I'm so interested. Why do you think what are the things that trigger your interest, I guess?
I mean, this is the most boring question, because I can be there with you with 100% what you just said. I mean, it's the fairness issue. It's the, growing up interest in this. I talked about this today. When I was in high school, I was in Army JRTC. That's Junior Reserve Officers Training Corps. The senior level is in college, and then they mint you as an officer. President Clinton killed my program for the peace dividend, but I'm not bitter. At any rate, when I was in high school, I had the senior Army instructor. He jettisoned the curriculum for a while, and then we just talked about Vietnam. We had a book about Vietnam that he just went through, and I was so impressed by this idea. Like, how do you win a war militarily and lose it politically? And that set me on a whole different course in my life, because I study for a living leadership. This is what I do. Like this, this is my whole game, right? Because of that, I think that's what steered me this direction. So I'm fascinated by this. So I had this podcast that was running 200 some odd episodes that were there, and I just pivoted and went this direction.
Yeah. And thank you so much for Lee Dixon, who's a member of my channel, such a great supporter. So thank you, Lee. Thanks for the super chat there. Why are Republicans mixing border and Ukraine up? So this is quite interesting. You get this a lot.
Yeah, I can answer that.
Do you want to explain it to some of the viewers?
So what you hear is people mostly in the populist wing of the conservatives, of the Republican Party. They're okay. So as a conservative, hey, I want to control the border too, make sure what's coming in should be coming in. And I'm fine with immigration. I'm cool with that. I just want to know that we're not having bad elements, drugs, coyotes bringing in things that shouldn't be in, whatever else shouldn't be coming in. Control the border. That's your job as a government, right? But it's not like number one item, whereas so conservatives are like, yeah, it's important. Populists are like, this is crazy important, this is number one. Does that make sense? So that's part one. Now you add to that they're looking at, like, why are we spending $45 billion on Ukraine when we can't even do this? So Biden's inflaming it because he's not controlling it at all. He's just kind of letting it be loosey-goosey, whatever. He could have dealt with the issue, but he chooses not to, because on the liberal priority, it's down here, right? And so they're the people that think it's this important and the people that think this important are at odds with each other. But they'll frame it in a way where, how are we giving this money to Ukraine? And it's not about Ukraine. It's how are we doing this over there when we're not doing this here? And if it was my highest priority, I would perhaps see it that kind of way too. But my answer is because we don't want to start World War III. We want to actually keep Putin from becoming Hitler. The greatest service that we can do to Putin is stop him here. Hitler said that if he was stopped in Czechoslovakia, I think it was, if he was stopped in the Sudetenland, he would have stopped. I read that with my own eyes when I was studying about the Third Reich, and I'm just like, No, that's why this is important. Stop Putin here.
There's also an interesting about the money. So people look at headline money and they say 45 billion or whatever. Here's a bill of 8 billion, but it's not like here's 8 billion that we're going to take out of education, right? And then we're going to give it to Ukraine.
Well,
Actually, most of that money is probably already involved in budgeting for
no, it's
and
deficit spending. And
and
so I don't like that. But what I really didn't like, and they shouldn't have done it this way, the Democrats pushed it through with the omnibus bill, which had
yeah.
all their happy priorities, which made Republicans have to go, okay, I'm going to vote for this. And
But
so,
that's politics. So, I mean,
yeah,
the
that is politics.
GOP would have done that without a shadow of doubt. But I would kind of expect that. But I think there's some clever, like not clever accounting. Sometimes we look at these headline numbers, and actually a lot of that is putting value on stuff that's already been created, and it is in storage, and actually you're going to save money and not having to scrap it or whatever. But also other things like if we're spending that money on US industrial military complex, and I can't believe I'm actually, like 5 years ago, would I have been sitting here like defending the military industrial complex? No.
Isn't this a bizarre time?
Funny times. But funny, not ha, funny, strange. So, if you're saying, right, we're going to spend 8 billion on, military equipment, that's 8 billion going to US companies that then, and the supply chains, and it's actually a stimulus package, in a time of economic hardship. And yeah, you can talk about, could you spend it better elsewhere or whatever, but actually it's not just a case of throwing money at Ukraine. It's spending money arguably in the US and giving the stuff that you've made, giving people jobs and giving the products to, so what I'm trying to say is these things are more nuanced than just like X amount of dollars here, X amount of dollars there.
I'm smiling here because I'm by no means Keynesian, so I don't see it as stimulus, but I do see it as Ben Shapiro made an excellent point. We spend 6% of our military spending on degrading Russia in a tremendous way without a loss of any Americans because they wanted the weapons and we supplied it to them. Like, that's a win. Like to
so
help
it's
them
because I haven't
defend
seen
themselves.
Sorry, I haven't seen much of Ben Shapiro to do with the war. Like, I am not a fan of Ben Shapiro.
I can imagine.
But what's his position? Is he actually pro, defending Ukraine?
So his position is that eventually Biden's going to have to force Zelenskyy to make peace, like down the line somewhere, where it comes to it. And he doesn't know when or where or whatever. But his position was, this has been great in geopolitically to degrade Russia from keeping them from doing this kind of nonsense again. The money that we spent was well worth it. Look, I look at this as a business management professor looking at it going, there sometimes you just have to, there's a sunk cost. There's stuff that you have to pay as just a cost of doing business, right? This is one of those times that military spend is a cost of doing business, let alone the justice side that you're talking about, let alone that we're not pulling the strings on Zelenskyy. They're begging for stuff. And we're like, here, you want to go do that? Go take it to them. Right.
No, I completely agree. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Go ahead.
Oh no, I was going to say, what do you think of the theory? Because you just brought this up a couple of times. This is kind of what Lloyd Austin said, who is the US Secretary of Defense, for those who don't know. So he back in April of last year, he said, we're going to do everything we can to degrade the Russian capability, right? And I've been putting forward this theory, and actually there's a few people who said this. It's not like I'm sure other greater thinkers than I have, putting forward this idea that America and other nations could have given Ukraine a whole load of weaponry straight off the bat, and they could have won this war really quickly, in theory, arguably. But they didn't. The US has actually given them just enough stuff to keep them in the game and keep them consistently degrading Russian capability and capacity. So that actually this is a far greater long-term effective strategy in taking Russia out of the game than giving Ukraine everything straight away, finishing the war really quickly. But 6 months down the line, Russia would be back to strength.
Yeah, I don't think it's quite like that. We're close. It's more like, is it really going to work? I don't know. Let's give them this stuff and see what they do with it. Oh, that worked out. Let's give them this stuff. Wow, look what they did with that. That's pretty cool. Right. Let's give them this stuff. And I think it's a progressive unfolding in that sense. And there was a Pentagon official that I remember reading that said, look, on a scale of 1 to 10, the Ukrainians are at 12. I mean, militarily, I mean, really, they have proved themselves, and I think they just keep getting more for that. Whereas if you had given them a bunch of stuff and then it all fell apart and then fell into Russian hands, and I mean, so they had to be nuanced in some way. So I think they've tried to be measured. I wish they would have given some longer range things sooner, but I get it. They're not trying to kick off World War III and didn't want to arm them with something that they could hit Moscow with or something. So, yeah.
Okay. As we meander towards the end here, and hopefully we'll take time to talk again. This will be the first,
absolutely,
of some more. I've always said that Putin couldn't win this war right from the beginning. I wrote an article saying, way back at the beginning, saying he can't win this. Like, the whole it should have been over in 2 days, deposing the government, 15 days max to clear everything up, job done. And then when they didn't, as you say, didn't welcome the Russians with a bunch of flowers and open arms, he was then stuck in another country with his army going, well, now we've got to have a war, and we weren't prepared for a war. They literally weren't prepared for war. And then they're screwed. From that point on, there was no way. You can't occupy a country that doesn't want you there. So there's no way Putin could win. So my question to you is, if you were Putin, and of course you'd have to take on the mindset of Putin, and you're not Putin, you've got different morality as Putin, but I guess, what would you do to win? Would you just pull out? And where do you see this thing going? So kind of two massive questions there. But
okay. So first, the Allies after World War II had a 50-to-1 ratio or something close to that to occupy in a beaten Germany. Okay. So you need more than that when they're hostile and they keep fighting, and little old ladies with jars of tomatoes are coming at you. Yeah. So, I mean, when it's that, right? That Vietnam book I was talking about, they said there was a line in there that grabbed me, like, should you fear somebody that comes, you have guns and they're coming in with bows and arrows? Yes, you should fear somebody who's going to fight you with bows. Like, if they're that desperate to oppose you. Yeah. And Ukraine has the moralist of the physical is 3:1, said Napoleon, right? They have all kinds of high morale in Ukraine because they're defending their homeland. So that's a different thing. Putin has to do where I think Putin is going, which I hope he doesn't do it, but I think he's going to more fully mobilize. I think he wants to get him onto a fuller, I don't know about full war footing, but he wants to ramp it up. It's like he wasn't serious early on because he believed his reports. I would absolutely hate to be a dictator, because if you're a dictator, people are just saying, yes, boss, yes, boss, yes, boss, all day long. And he got bad information, like that this will be fine. And now
there is intelligence to suggest that he's now getting better information. I mean, this was definitely an accepted thing at the beginning, because there's no way you would have taken that decision to invade if you had the proper information. It's just like my knowledge of Ukraine, and you could just go and watch what's it thingy on fire, the Netflix documentary about the Euromaidan protests, which is a beautiful documentary to watch. Like, you could just watch that and go, don't invade there. Like, that's all the intelligence I need to say, that's never going to work. So, like, Putin was clearly given massively incorrect intelligence, but the idea now is that he's starting to get better intelligence. But
I feel like people that have been doing these YouTube daily updates on Ukraine actually have more knowledge about Ukraine than Putin does. I mean, seriously. I mean, we've only been paying attention for 9 months, but still, it's like he doesn't get it, and his theory is blocking his ability to I think he believes his talking points. Right. And his propaganda that the West caused this and they're behind this, and Ukraine is part of Russia. And no, Ukraine doesn't want to be part of Russia. But if he really believes that, and he's going to force that, and he's going to go down in history as Peter the Great reincarnated. So at any rate, to answer your question, he cannot win unless he more fully mobilizes. He can't go to full mobilization without risking himself politically, because now everybody's involved. Right. If in the early scenario, it's just this thing over here. Don't worry about it. It didn't affect me, so okay, I could, let Russia win, is the way that the attitudes of people in Russia were, right? Now that it's starting to come home, they're starting to feel differently about it. And you see the shift in the polls from legitimate, like Levada's polls, legitimate polling sources are showing that. And in Ukraine, they went from like 20% in the eastern kind of regions, 20% were had good feelings toward Russia before the invasion, and now it's down to like 2%. So that's what happened. So he has to, I mean, he's going to have to ramp it up if he's going to have any hope. And I don't think he's actually going to be able to fully ramp it out without being in a politically dangerous position.
So that's basically his last roll of the dice, really.
Yeah.
Is that what you're saying? And even that it comes with an awful lot of
I'm nervous for Russia that it's going to implode. I don't want Russia to implode. I want Russia to be beaten and then be able to get Ukrainian children that have been taken hostage, essentially taken. I mean, thousands of. Look, I have 6 kids. If my kid was lost in my own city, I'd be like, imagine them being taken to a different country where you can't get to them. I mean, so I want them to be beaten on the battlefield, so they have to say uncle and allow these things to happen and allow whatever reparations and that kind of thing. But I'm fearful that the longer it goes on, the greater the chance that Russia can actually economically implode. And if you have dueling warlords of different swaths of Russia, you're not getting those kids back. I mean, that's a whole different can of worms, and I do not want to see that.
But there's so many variables and ramifications to what might happen. So if Russia implodes, then there's every chance. Like I've long said, and I'm not sure if you said this one as well, was reading it somewhere else, but I've long said that actually, although China is a kind of de facto ally of Russia, China benefits most if Russia loses.
They're the big winner.
Yeah, because they will come up and mop everything up. They will take all the resources. They'll probably even have a go at the eastern provinces. They will, or the eastern regions. They will be like, "Oh, we'll help you get back on your feet by having our fingers in every single piece of natural resource that you guys have got." So they stand to win a lot.
Yeah, the way I discussed this was it used to be that Russia was the big brother and China was the little brother, and now it is switched. But it's only because Russia has degraded.
Yeah.
Right. So now China's kind of becoming the bigger brother, and the degree that so that's what's going on.
Yeah, Russia is there's a real threat of them becoming a vassal state of China, and the Russians must kind of know this. I'm sure they'll be that worried. So okay, the final question, which is the original question I asked, which is where does this go this year? How does this end? Not how might it end, or how would you like it to end, but how do you think it's going to go?
I think it's going to be long. Neither Putin nor Zelenskyy can stop their constituent as leaders. Okay, when you're a leader, it looks like you're in charge. You're really not. You're really boxed in by certain parameters. And as leaders, they're both beholden to their constituents. Think about it like this with your podcast. What if tomorrow you decided that, so I'm all in on Ukraine, you're all in on Ukraine, right? What if tomorrow you decided, you know what, in second thought, I think Russia's the way to go, right? You have 3,000 some odd on. I knew you're migrating your people over from the old channel to this one. I looked at it today. It was
this is the old one. Yeah, 10,000.
Yeah, whichever.
10,000. New one's got 4,000 now. So
yeah, whatever it was, you would have like 50 left.
Yeah.
Would be like, I wonder why he's saying that. Most of them would, because the leader is often following the followers in a weird way, right? Like he's becoming the voice of the followers, right? It's so
that which talks to an issue I've had in politics in general. I remember my local MP. She was canvassing a member of parliament. She was canvassing on the street. So wrong party for me. Completely disagree with her, and I challenge her. And I know her anyway. And I said, look, this whole thing. So I think it was about same-sex marriage, which was David Cameron, the then Conservative politician, passed that as a law, but she voted against it. And I said, why did you vote against that? And she said, well, actually, I got 50 angry letters from my constituents that really shouted about same-sex marriage being a terrible thing. And so I took that on board and thought they represented the constituency and voted no. And I said, yeah, but weren't they just the loud ones? Because everyone else was pretty much fine.
That's a possibility.
Well, she said, yeah, broadly, you're right, actually. And most people were for it. And I made a wrong decision. I said, what is politics? And this is, I don't know the answer to this. This is a kind of open question, but is politics going to parliament and representing your people and just doing what they want you to do? Or is politics saying, no, I feel strongly about this, you guys might not know enough about it, and I'm going to convince you that actually you might be wrong on this, and I'm going to take you with me? Or because if you're just a mirror reflection of them, then you could be anyone. What's the point of, do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I was a government major in college, a government and psych double major, and that was the discussion we had in my very first class in government. So we're not going to solve that here.
Yeah,
But
no,
I
we're
will.
not.
But I would like to put a pitch. If you're watching this on my channel, please go see Jonathan's channel. We occupy different lanes. Like, he's going to show you things on the ground, and he's going to be showing you his Twitter feed and what all those kind of, like, here's what you're seeing, the play by play. I'm in a different space. We're not competitors. We're actually working toward the same goal, and it is ATP Geo. Is that correct?
Yep, that's correct. ATP Geo. And I would just put up your one, which, oh my goodness, I accidentally got rid of it. Oh, that's when I shut everything down and decided to go away for a second.
Yeah.
But
So if you're looking for me, it's
there it
if you
is.
look at War in Ukraine, Professor Gerdes reviews the news, or just YouTube /Dr.Gerdes, and you'll find me, and just look for the Ukrainian flag behind my head, and you're in good shape.
Absolutely. Well, look, I guess we've come to a good place to not finish, but to put a pause on this. And I'm sure we'll be back again, because I've enjoyed this, and I hope you would
Absolutely.
you know, come back and have another chat. It's great to see that we have commonality, and like the Emo Phillips joke you recounted, you know, let's not look for differences. Let's try and look for commonalities. And yes, we will have differences, and I'm sure we'll have opportunities to maybe, you know, chip away at those differences and see where we stand. But let's remember those commonalities, and here it's like, and it goes back to what we were talking about before, like you reference, is I look at this and think, how can a pro-Russian, how can you be pro-Russian, how can you look at this and look at all the information, we've all got the same information at our fingertips, taking a look at it and go, yeah, Russia are the good guys. Like, I just don't know how you can do that. So we are coming to the same conclusion, which is support Ukraine.
So my
what would
mom
you have
used
to
to
add to
tell
that?
me, that who you run around with is who you become. And Russia tends to hang out with North Korea and Belarus and Iran and Syria and sometimes Venezuela. So yeah, just be careful with that.
That is such a good point. It's like, look at who are your mates, like who
Mhm.
voted for you in the UN. Like, that's a real kind of like bad guys list, or like, you know, just nefarious states. So yeah, absolutely right. Do you want to hang out with them, or do you want to be the good guys? No, that's really simplistic, but like, there you go. I feel really strongly about that. Thank you, Ricky Johnson, so much. Legend is such a lovely member of my channel. I guess, you know, please check out Dr. Gerdes' stuff if you are one of my followers. That would be really great. It'd be lovely to see his subscriber account tick up, and because he's got really great digestible nuggets every single day. Really lovely to watch him. And as ever, you know, if you don't have time to watch both of us, I always say to my viewers, put me on 1.5 times speed. 1.75. I don't stumble. I don't say like, if I do say and it's really quick. You don't hear it. It's just seamless. So put us on quick, and everyone's happy.
All right. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for coming, and thank you all so much for your support, everyone in the live chats. And we will be back. Toodle pips, all the very best, and Slava Ukraini. I think I said that correctly.
That's good enough. Well, I mean,
Anyway, toodle pips, everyone. All the best. Thank you.